So after that bit of a break, we're going to get into some new topics in JavaScript. We've already looked at Ajax and how we can send requests to the server. Now we're going to get into how we can actually use something that is going to be a little bit more efficient and readable in our code, and that's the topic of promises. And promises can be a little bit confusing, so we might have to take this slowly, though I think in the next set of slides we'll get into how we actually use the fetch API, which will make some of this a little bit more evident. So if you don't really follow what's going on with promises here in the abstract, go ahead and watch the next video, and that should help you through some of your questions. So far we've looked at this XMLHttpRequest, and we looked at callbacks, and JavaScript is single-threaded. It's one of the challenges when we're working with JavaScript. Everything that we do, no matter how we try to simulate the set timeout or set interval or anything like that, it's going to be single-threaded, so it's always going to be executing in one place. And this is going to lead to some challenges as far as our execution. If our execution is if we create like a busy loop or something, a busy infinite loop, then we're going to be stuck. But it also, the XML HTTP request, it also challenges the readability of our code. When we make a call to an XML HTTP request, if we want to use a callback function, it can lead to the situation where we execute this and then we have to go find something else in our code, and then we have to find something else and something else. And if in the extreme you could get into a situation where your callback function calls another Ajax request or submits another Ajax request, then maybe leads to multiple callback functions potentially, then maybe leads to potentially more Ajax requests. And you can see how this is going to get really out of hand really quickly. So, just a simple example, we could say, go get something, and then we're going to pass in that object and then call some particular callback function, and then that can call another callback function, and then that callback function can call do something or do something else here. And you can see that this sort of tracing is not going to be terribly logical. It's not obvious at a glance that go get something is going to lead to call this when done, and that's not going to be obvious that leads to call another function when done, unless you kind of understand the context and how JavaScript works. Plus, you have to understand that these three functions, or this first function call and then these other two functions, could be defined in all sorts of places throughout the code. So this is a little bit easier to understand because it's all in one page, but if you get beyond that, it can get very complicated very quickly and hard to follow, and we want our code to be readable and maintainable. So promises help to address this. If you think about code producing things and code consuming things, and a lot of our functions do this, right? A lot of functions will go off and retrieve some data, or they'll perform a calculation, they produce some particular thing, and then a lot of other functions do something with that. Maybe they take that and they format it for output, or maybe they deliver that, or take that data and save it somewhere. So you can kind of think of functions as producers and consumers, and promises attempt to connect these two ideas. So it allows us a more succinct and sequential way to handle these events and callbacks. It allows us to chain together functions in a more clear function. So we'll take a look at this, and we'll continue to explore this concept over the rest of this presentation and the next presentation. Promises basically have four statuses, and one of those statuses is really a combination of the previous one. So fulfilled means that the promise is successful, like it did what we wanted it to do. That particular execution or purpose or function did what we consider to be right. We also may have rejected, which is that there's an error that promise was failed. We have pending, where that promise is sort of it's still executing, it's not completed yet. And then we have settled is what we would call a promise that is fulfilled or rejected. It's settled basically says the promise is done, whether that's kind of our success or that's our failure. So to take a look at this, promises are built into JavaScript, so you can create a variable and construct a new promise here. And then we have a function. We have a resolve function or a reject function. So the resolve function basically is executed when things are successful, and the reject function is called when something is wrong. If something goes wrong or we have an error, that's when we would call our reject function. So using a promise, a way to think about this is here's a task that might take some time. We start with a large integer, and we're going to factor that integer all the way from 3 up to its square root, and that's going to take a decent amount of time. So this is something that we can go off and compute and then get the result when we're done. So resolver function here is called, and we're going to execute that when everything is finished here. So you can see here we're gonna, the promise allows us to execute that resolver function when done, and that error function if there's a problem. Now I don't know really what exception you might run into here, but if you did, the error function would handle that. So now we take this promise and then we can run it, then do something with that output, that was passed to that resolver function, or do something with the error that was passed to that reject function. So you can see here, resolver function result. So here, then is gonna actually execute on this value, or error is gonna be this exception, and it's gonna do something with that error. So async and await make this a little bit more useful and a little bit more intuitive. So async basically wraps your function with a promise. So an async function says, we're going to go do something, and just let's wrap that in a function that will resolve it. So you can see here, async function, some function that just returns 100 is basically the same as calling promise.resolve 100. And that's useful because then we can do some of these promisey things like use the then. So some function then do something with that particular result. So you can see here how we can start to chain these together in a way that is a little bit more practical and readable. And we can use await to handle the result of that promise asynchronously. So this way it gives JavaScript a chance to break and go do something else and then respond to this when it's actually ready. So async function do something here. We're going to create this promise, and then we're going to, you can see here, let result await promise. Basically, this is going to resolve the promise and assign that value to result when the promise is completed. So you can see, this allows us to not necessarily have to do all of the JavaScript chaining with XMLHttpRequest, and we're going to get into how we can leverage JavaScript's built-in APIs to do that. And here you can see this is a bigger example where we're going to load something from the server. And in this case, we're actually still going to use XMLHttpRequest. So you can see we are going to construct that, and we're going to create this function here. And when that's done, we're going to resolve, and then we're going to send that request. And you can see we're going to wait for that response. So we're going to wait for all of these things to happen, and then when we actually get to resolve function, we are going to basically take that response and pass that into the JSON here. Then we can parse the JSON object, and then we can do something with that. So you can see this makes it a little bit more encapsulated into this particular function, and hopefully the code's a little bit easier to read and understand what's actually happening. So I'd encourage you to take a look at these slides. These slides do have some links that will show you some other further tutorials on async and await. And if you're not super sure of it yet, go ahead and take a look at the next video, which will hopefully answer some of your questions. Thanks for watching.